My name is Anna Johnson, and I was fortunate enough to conduct an interview with music theorist Eron Smith. This interview was conducted as part of a project for Brad Osborn's Analyzing Pop Music seminar at the University of Kansas. In this interview, Eron and I discussed their education, career, and specifically their research on prosodic dissonance, which was published this year. I hope you enjoy. Okay, well, I wonder if you could just give a little bit of background about who you are and how you got, to where you are in your career.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I'm Erin Smith. I've been trying to make this professional mononym thing happen where I'm just Erin because there are too many Smiths running around. We'll see if that works. It's not a hill I'm going to die on. I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia, which is on the outside edge of Atlanta. And I went to my undergrad at Pomona College, which was kind of where I discovered music theory. So I didn't know music theory was a field before that. I went into college basically thinking I would do something music related and likely also something else. The something else didn't end up happening, but I took a lot of great classes. So I really enjoyed, I think Theory 3 was kind of the turning point for me with Jody Rockwell. And he sort of did this like survey of graduate topics. And I remember being like, this is really neat. And I expressed to my lab professor, which is basically what they do for oral skills or did in the 2010s. And Gail Blankenberg was the professor for that. And I had said, I really like doing theory stuff. I wish you could just do theory because I don't know if I want to be a composer. And she was like, good news. You can do that. And so then it was kind of a roller coaster from there because I was like, oh, like I think I want to apply to theory grad programs. And I think I gave Jody and Alfred some whiplash a little bit because I was pretty abruptly like, let's do this thing. So then I applied to programs in music theory grad schools. I knew nothing about it. They kind of had to uh, guide me through the process very abruptly. And then I ended up at Eastman, where I did my master's and my PhD. So I went straight out of undergrad to my graduate program, and then I was just there for 6 years. The transition to grad school was tough. I think because I didn't know anything about the field in advance, I was just like, music theory is neat. So I came in kind of being interested in a lot of different things and not really sure. Like some people come into graduate school and they're like, this is going to be my dissertation. And I came in like, what is a ritornello? I don't understand any of this stuff. And kind of having more of like a liberal arts background, which has its strengths as well. Okay, I think I'm meandering a little bit here. So from there, I took my coursework. I started doing more of like the classical side of work. I took William Marvin's Schenker class and started doing things with type 5 sonatas and classical concertos, which was the topic of my dissertation, which was far too long. My advice to anybody going into music theory grad school is do not write a long thesis. It's not worth it. But I really enjoyed working with that topic. In the meantime, like while I'm working on my dissertation, procrastinating as I go, as one does. I really like pop music. I've always been into that. I am an amateur songwriter as well. I've always liked listening to what's going on. I love to dance, love to make playlists to blast in the car. And so I was like, oh, I think I might want to do something on this. And initially, I had been listening to a bunch of tracks that I kept noticing like having like a sexy flat 2 sort of sound in them. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like this is, and so it started as a joke. And then someone was like, oh, you could do this as a conference paper if you find enough examples. So that became my SMTV video on hotness and flat 2. And I was like, oh, pop music scholarship is really fun. It's really welcoming. Not that Mozart scholarship isn't, but I think it's a lot more traditional and a lot more intimidating because people have done so much work already. So yeah, basically then I started doing pop research, finished my dissertation while in Illinois with my spouse. That's Matt Chu. He's also a music theorist. And then during that time, I also got the gig at Oberlin, and then I had like a nice 8-month window where I didn't have a job yet, but was going to, which is an ideal situation to be in. And that's when I worked on the Prosodic Dissonance article, which came out of a seminar paper from my last semester of coursework. So that's probably way longer of an answer than you wanted. But yeah, it was basically like, what is music theory? Going through classical stuff, discovering that I love to talk about pop music and had some thoughts on it. And then, yeah, got a couple of publications out so far, and hopefully more to come when when I get more ideas. Does that answer your question? Maybe too much.
No, not at all. That was perfect. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned this, but I wanted to ask a little bit about how you prefer to be cited by your first name rather than last name. And as I want to say, as a fellow common last name, Johnson here, Smith there, I get it. Like, but tell me about that decision to change how you're cited and maybe what effect it's had.
Yeah. I want to preface this by saying it's not something that really offends me. Like, if people cite me by my last name, I'm not someone who like has trauma or baggage associated with my last name. Like, it's just very common. So I realized this because my first name is Eron, which is very uncommon. I've never met anybody else with that. My parents told me they think it's Welsh. It's an old family name for my great 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 aunt who was a historian. I don't know. It's a whole thing. But my first name is a lot more distinct and unique than my last name. Um, and I was like, well, if I'm a pop music scholar, a lot of pop artists go by one name. Maybe it would be fun to kind of try this. So that's kind of one half of it, is just the like, my first name is more distinct than my last, very pragmatic. And then the other half is kind of from like a feminist angle of, I think it's interesting that we cite people by last name by default, and that at least in the US, last name is usually a patrilineal system. So we end up citing people and having more prestige associated with the name that typically tracks like our fathers. And in my case, yeah, my last name is my dad's. I love my dad. I have no issue with him. But at the same time, I'm like, well, why is the more prestigious name not the one that I'm called, but the one that is associated with that aspect of my heritage? So that's kind of like the two parts of choosing to do that. And I'll say again, it's not like, I don't know how much it's going to be possible to really make this happen, but it's something that I kind of prefer. I think it's fun, like to think about these sorts of things. Like when people lowercase their names in citations, it's like a quirky thing that I'm kind of hoping to make happen. But yeah, if people cite me by Smith or something like that, like I think the Prosodic Dissonance article, the URL has me listed as Smith, and that doesn't bug me in the slightest. I'm like, yeah, that's part of my name too. It's just harder to find me by Googling that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so interesting. I had never seen that before, but in my class's bibliography where we have all the articles listed, I noticed that you were cited as Eron. And so looking into that, I was excited to learn about that. That's great. So yeah. So maybe for people who might watch this who haven't had the chance to read your article yet, could you maybe give just a baseline of, what prosodic dissonance means?
Yeah. So prosodic dissonance is any sort of conflict between the prosody of language. So that might involve like where we break phrases when we're talking, where we put stress on syllables. So that aspect of it, the prosody of language, and then the accent structure or the musical setting, basically. So I guess in layman's terms, it's if you have conflict between the way that you would speak something and the way it's sung in music. So it's an aspect that's unique to music with lyrics, because you obviously can't have a conflict between text and music if there's no text. And I think it's really interesting. I'm very interested in linguistics, and I'm kind of trying to read up more on that and get more into it from an interdisciplinary perspective. But yeah, that's kind of the overall summary of what it is. And usually in my article, I'm talking about stress conflicts. So a conflict between the apparent accent as it's set in the music and the accent in the way that we would pronounce a word when speaking.
Yes.
And then I also talk about a couple of other aspects like phrases.
Yeah, I think that's a great baseline explanation of that. And I mean, you talked a lot about, I think the two things that I focused on when I shared your research with the class was there's a lot of examples of the emphasis happening through either rhythm or through pitch, and that conflicting with where it would align with our stress syllables.
Mhm.
And so it kind of made me curious of if there was a certain song that sparked this interest of yours, or how this idea became interesting to you.
Yeah. So you'd think it would be the song Unconditionally by Katy Perry, which is the first song I use in the article. But no, actually, it was sort of just came from like I would be listening to music and be like, this is really weird pronunciation. It came from just trying to like sing along with things. Um, I don't know what kind of started this for me. I genuinely don't know anymore. I think I would have been able to tell you like 5 years ago, and now it's now it's gone. But I would just like sing along to things and be like, that pronunciation is kind of weird, or I'm not really sure what they're saying there, and I'd look it up and be like, oh, that feels kind of awkward. It feels like there's some kind of conflict there. And then I was talking to my friend Suraj Saifullah, who now is in chemical engineering, actually, but he used to be a musicologist, and he was like, oh, you mean like unconditionally? And I was like what? And so then I looked up the song and found that. Um, I think it's something that's kind of intuitive to a lot of people who enjoy singing along to music because you can kind of feel when it's happening. Um, Man, I wish I had a specific song for you, but I don't.
Oh, that is perfect because, yeah, just like you were saying, when I first looked at the article, I was like, I'm not familiar with this term. But when I started going through the examples, I was like, oh, yeah, like you can kind of feel it. It is kind of intuitive. And
Mhm.
unconditionally, famously, is,
Yeah.
example.
And people get so mad. I think including me, like sometimes I'm like, this stinks. Like, why would you set it this way? But I think it's kind of an opportunity to challenge ourselves as well and be like, okay, why are we having that effect? Why does it make us mad? Why are we experiencing that? And that's where the article came from.
Yes, exactly. I love that. Um, yeah. Oh, that example is famous. And as I asked the class about it, everyone immediately they were like, "Yes, I remember hearing that on the radio. Like it felt so awkward, whatever." It made me wonder, like in your opinion, do you think that's a conscious something that's like conscious or subconscious for the artist? Do you think that's something that they like are making the decision as they compose it?
All right, so here's me speculating because I haven't really had a chance to talk to most of these people. I've been corresponding via email with a songwriting professor at Berkeley, Ben Camp, and they said that I think they had talked to like someone who worked with Royal and the Serpent. It was, but I don't think other than that, I've had like no firsthand connection with any of these artists, so I'm not sure. All of this is speculating. Standard caveats. Um, but I think that example, I would say probably not. Probably that was just the way that it ends up getting set when you have like people working on words and people working on music. And then sometimes when it comes together, it feels strange. I don't know if that's because the music and the text were written separately and then came together, or if it's just part of the way that it was written, or if the person was a native English speaker. I'm genuinely not sure like what the production process leading to that song was. I think sometimes it is intentional. So like the Janelle Monáe example, where she sets compression and puts the emphasis on come. Obviously, that's kind of like I think that that is part of the like sexual atmosphere of her song, where she's trying to um, put a little bit more of an emphasis on that, almost as like a cheeky like wink.
Yeah.
Um, but again, this is just me reading into how intentional it seems. If I had to guess, usually it's probably an accident. But if it has like a wordplay type thing, um, then maybe it's on purpose. I really want to interview artists and get into this, but I don't really know. Like I can't just like cold email Katy Perry. So
I love that. Well,
yeah.
I also I'm really curious about that because I mean, especially that one where it's so prominent, like in the chorus, like that's the name of the song. I would kind of question if that was intentional. It makes me wonder, since you mentioned you are an amateur songwriter, how has your research affected your songwriting, if at all?
Oh, interesting. Um, huh. I think it's definitely made me more conscious of the way that I set words. A lot of times when I'm writing songs, I'll sort of come up with what I want a stress pattern to be and then try to fit words into that. because I think especially when I was younger, it used to really bother me when things didn't fit or were like, I guess, prosodically dissonant. Um, I think since writing this article, I've had a little bee in my bonnet about maybe trying to write a song where the things are set intentionally off from each other, but I haven't done it yet. Now maybe this is kind of like nudging me to do it. Uh, yeah, I guess it's made me much more conscious of it is the short of it. But it's also, I think it goes the other direction too, of like my songwriting and trying to that process of writing things where I start by saying like, what are the stress patterns in this melody? Where am I trying to put the strong syllables and then fitting the text to it? That kind of led to thinking about this in the first place. But yeah, you're making me think I need to go try to write a song that's prosodically dissonant on purpose.
I think you should. Yeah, I'm gonna
Gosh.
vote yes on that. um, I love that. As you were trying to gather these examples, I mean, there's a good number of examples throughout the article that really do a great job of illustrating the points that you're making. What was that process like? Like, how did you gather those?
Some of it was more just songs that I already knew. So I think that was the easiest part of it was to say, all right, like here are a bunch of examples that I've heard doing this, and then I would make a list. And then also, yeah, if I was driving around or listening to things, or if someone released a new track and I would listen to it, and I would just make a little note, like if I heard something that sounded like prosodic dissonance. And then as I started presenting the work, which initially was at the Indiana University Graduate Conference, which was really fun, by the way. Highly recommend people do that. And then also I think I did it at South Central Music Theory as well. Um, and then people start sending you examples once you've talked about it in public. They're like, oh, like this song. And then you start amassing the examples. So that was kind of the first two phases was just knowing the songs in advance or discovering them kind of organically, and then people sending them to me. And then there was a small bit of it where if I was looking for, um, let's see, I think when I was looking for more of like a speech like example. I think the example of Olivia Rodrigo, Brutal, that one just came from me saying, like, all right, who are some current artists? I'm just going to go listen through their whole discography. And then that is the first track, I think. And so it was like, great, here it is. So there was also some like systematic going through and being like, all right, who are some top artists right now who are like pop adjacent or in pop, and what are they doing with their lyrics?
Yes, I love that. As I was, sharing this information, I was like, I want to see if I can find some examples too. And so that's kind of the route I went as well. And I was curious if certain artists were easier to find these examples. For example, when I was looking for them, I was able to find like a good number of examples with Olivia Rodrigo
Yeah.
and some with Taylor Swift as well. But did you have that same experience?
Yeah, I mean, those are probably two of the artists I would mention. Um, I I think I haven't really discovered like this artist always does it, or this artist never does it. But I did encounter, like, you'll notice there are multiple Taylor Swift examples in the article. Alex Shannon just did a talk at this past Society for Music Theory conference where he talked about prosodic dissonance in Taylor Swift. I think it's widespread enough that you can find a lot of it. Yeah, Sour by Olivia Rodrigo has a ton of them. And I think there are also at least two examples in my article from her. So I would say like those are two of the artists that I'm just aware are using a lot of prosodically dissonant text settings. And in Taylor Swift's case, I know she does a lot, like she does her own songwriting. So that probably means that it's less of a product of like different layers coming together in the production process and more like actually how she's writing the songs. So I'm not sure. Oh, wait, I do have one more thought on this, which is so I married into the emo music fandom because sort of like the fourth wave emo is music we hear a lot in our house because Matt is really into that. And I think in sort of those DIY speech like singing type genres, I think there's extra prosodic dissonance where you'll have like, oh man, I can't think of an example. I might email you this, email you something later on when I think of it, but you'll have like something where the text setting feels intentionally weird or awkward, or like the pronunciation of something will be delayed for a really long time, almost as like a comedy thing, or a way of expressing just like how deeply upset someone is, because it's a very emotional style of music. Emo music is not my main wheelhouse, so I can't really speak as an expert on that, but I'm hoping to eventually do a cute little spousal collab and see if we can find some prosodic dissonance to talk about in the fourth and fifth wave emo stuff.
Oh, that's great. That's super fun. And I know, just another question. In the article, you mentioned it briefly. I know that this is typically tailored toward, like, your research is tailored toward English pop music. Have you done any looking into, like, with other languages, or are you aware of any other research regarding different languages and prosodic dissonance?
So there's a fair amount of research on text setting in tonal languages, like in different dialects of Chinese, for example. I know, like, if you go looking for um, work on Cantonese or Mandarin, you'll find a lot of discussions of like specifically how we're setting pitch in relationship to tone. I don't speak any of those languages well enough to feel like I can talk about it, but I know the work is out there. And I think some of it made it into my bibliography as well, but I'd have to go back and look at it. When you're writing an article along the way, people will like really send you lots and lots of sources, and they all end up in there, and you're like, oh man, there's so much out there to read. So that's one main thing that I'm aware of. Um, I grew up partially speaking Spanish because my family lived in Mexico and Puerto Rico for a while. So I would love to do some work also on Latin pop and like reggaeton and things like that, finding examples there, but I haven't really done the legwork yet. So that's the only thing that I think would be in my personal scholarly future. But I would encourage like anybody who speaks another language besides English to think about what aspects are in a language's prosody and how that might intersect or not with the way that the music in that language sounds. I think it's a really interesting prospect that could fit virtually any language that has music in it. So,
Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. Um, okay, and then also I read in a bio of yours that you are really passionate about um, coping strategies for mental health in academia, and I think it would be great if you could maybe share a little bit about that.
yeah, so I'm a very anxious person. I've always been an anxious person. I also have a lot of eating phobias that I've been working on for a long time. So those are kind of like my personal mental health things. And I think this started from just me trying to talk more about it and be more open about it. And I guess finding what works for each individual. Like if it's medication, great, that works for some people. If it's therapy, great. I'm a huge advocate for that. Um, but I don't know. I would like to be more professionally involved in talking about mental health, especially for graduate students, because I think it can feel really bleak. It's an environment where you're constantly surrounded by things that you don't know or things that you don't know how to do yet, and there's this expectation that you do already know how to do those things. Especially if, in my case, I came straight from undergrad going into an environment where I was around PhD students, and I just didn't know the same amount of stuff that they did. I still feel like I don't or like repertoire. People know so much repertoire, and just the like rampant imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So, but I also think there's a tendency to say like mental health is so important, and then kind of leave it at that and not talk about specific things that you can do. So I guess I'll kind of like throw out some unsolicited, like, here's what I would recommend, which is like number one, finding a therapist who's a good match and um, sticking with that can be so enormously helpful. I have seen it transform personalities really positively. I know for me, like the fact that I'm able to discuss any of my eating difficulties at all comes from that. Um, there are really dark times in people's lives, and having friends is great, but also you can't always just exclusively lean on friends, even if they're fantastic. So that's number one is get a therapist. Everyone, whoever's watching this eventually, get a therapist. It's great. It's so helpful. And then I think mindfulness is the other thing that I would suggest. And there are tons of apps for this. And I always say that they're good ideas, but I don't personally use them because I always forget to. I have it on my phone. It's hard to make yourself do it. But the breathe, note, analyze, strategize trajectory that like sort of takes you through mindfulness. So breathe is just like if you're panicking, if something is feeling really overwhelming, literally just taking a bunch of deep breaths and focusing on the breath. And then note would be like paying attention to like, what am I feeling? What physical sensations am I feeling? What emotions am I noticing myself feeling? And then from there, going back into the like, all right, what can I do about this? Analyzing why might I be feeling that way and strategizing what we can do about it. So that's what I do in my head when I'm like really, really overwhelmed. So yeah, there's my advice. Be an AS and get a therapist.
Great.
I don't know if you were looking for like my whole soapbox on mental health, but there's part of it.
That was perfect. And I mean, in my own experiences, that has also helped me a lot. And so I really appreciate you sharing about that, especially, with a bunch of fellow grad students this time of year. It can be draining. And so I appreciate you sharing about that.
Yeah, November and April, especially, like really, really dark times. I hope, yeah, have each other's backs as much as you can. It's rough. And the job market, especially, is, I think, just almost custom made to make people feel terrible about themselves because there are not very many openings and there are so many fantastic people out there who would be great for every job. So be kind to yourself as best you can. That's what my mom always says to me. She's like, be kind to yourself. Transitions are hard.
I love that. That's a great reminder just to stay kind, stay positive, and have
Yeah.
each other's backs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Community support is very crucial.
Absolutely. I love that. Music is collaborative, and sometimes it's hard to feel that way, but that's the whole point is
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really nice connection, actually, between the performance side of things. I think the performers have that right. Like you work with other people. Theory should have more co-authorships, I say, as someone with no co-authorships. So, like, we should be doing more collaborating, even if that starts with just talking about what's going on.
Exactly. I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate just learning from you through the article and learning about you face to face through Zoom. But I just want to thank you again for your time. And that's all the questions I have.
Yeah. It's really nice to meet you, and thank you so much for like, I've never been asked to do anything like this. I think that's kind of the fun part about being a junior scholar is you go from being like, I'm a student, and then suddenly people are asking you about your work, and you're like, me? Are you sure? So, thank you. Thank you for asking. Thank you for your really good questions, much better questions than I could have come up with. And yeah, just really nice to meet you. We're now in each other's networks, so keep in touch.
Yay! Yay. This concludes a lovely interview with Erin Smith. If you're interested in reading her article on prosodic dissonance, feel free to follow the link in the description box and it'll take you to her article. I hope you enjoyed and thank you.